So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of A Play of Words, where we explore the territory of word etymologies using the pathways of language, theology, spirituality, philosophy, culture, and much more. So, I'm your host, Kenan, and I have a love for etymology and philosophy and science. And today I have the pleasure of having with me my dear friend, Joshua Beneventi, as a co host um, for episode 4 of The Play of Words. He was also a guest for The Play of Words episode 3, which is soon to be released. And so Joshua has a background in anthropology and has a love of philosophy and languages. He actually speaks around 5, if not more, languages, including Arabic and studying Sanskrit and also some touch with Japanese. He speaks fluent Portuguese and English. And so, um, yeah, before we sort of step forward, we sort of stumbled, Joshua, on a couple of words. But before that, would you like to add something?
No, you covered all the bases.
Okay,
Happy to
excellent.
be here.
Okay, great. No, thank you for being here, and we'll be co-hosting these episodes. And so today, the sort of the list of words that we started with was the word dharma and the word throne. And we started to have some discussions earlier as we were researching and doing some detective work on these words. And we stumbled across an entire constellation of words around these that was invigorating in terms of seeing the parallels between the word throne and dharma and other very powerful mystical words in various languages, such as Arabic, in mystical Islam, and also in Sanskrit and Persian. So, so yeah, maybe to begin with you, Joshua, what has your detective work on this popular word of Dharma um, brought to you?
Well, I have a whole map really that we shared to a certain degree in our talks about this leading up to the episode. And it's fascinating because, like you alluded to, the word dharma, coming from the Proto-Indo-European root dhar, stretches out in a massive arc from Europe down to South Asia in the spread of its influence. And philosophically, cosmologically, it has played a huge role, if not, we could say the central role in the development of Proto-Indo-European, Indo-European culture and religion. So yeah, we could go many ways with it. We could talk about the meaning of dharma and related concepts in the Vedic or Sanskrit context, or we could move straight into how we find it expressing itself in English and words like throne or confirm, affirm, that Latin Greek route. Um, and then also, of course, maybe we can do that. Maybe we can go from the Sanskrit to the Latin English, and then because in English it expresses as throne, then maybe from there we can jump to the Arabic.
Perfect. Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, maybe let's begin with the Sanskrit because it is seems to be a Sanskrit word, although the history intermingles. So so the floor is yours.
Well, I would say that the most important thing to note about dharma is that dharma is, well, in a sense, we could say it means law or custom or norm in a way. There's an ancient word in the Rig Veda, and I think in the Vedas as a whole, which is rita. And rita refers to a cosmic order or cosmic law, a harmony essentially. And what the dharma is it is the, let's say, sociocultural manifestation of what alignment with Rita looks like in human society. So in Vedic or Sanskrit dictionaries, you have, pages and pages of meanings associated with the word dharma. But it's basically this, it's this alignment with this cosmic principle of order. And we see that philosophical trend spread throughout all of Indo-European cultures, and especially in the Greek, we see it expressed in this notion of the logos, which is a divine ordering principle. You know what, you mentioned something about the word dharana, and maybe you can say something about that. I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, that I'd forgotten about that. So thank you for reminding. Yeah, dharana is one of the limbs of yoga. Many people know it from the seven or eight limbs of yoga, Ashtanga, meaning eight limbs. And one of the developmental stages in yoga is dharana, where the senses are turned inwards to become one pointed. And so when we were earlier looking at dharma, and surprisingly, as you were mentioning, the root of dharma being dhar, which is to confirm, corroborate, or to make firm, and has other interesting etymologies, which we probably will explore. Um, it just seemed like a poetic connection between dharana, and I'm sure etymologically there is dhar and dharana are also connected, but that is just a guess on my part. But just that one sort of one pointedness and or a focusing of energies, so to speak, our energies in life, especially these days with so much extra stimulus, are distracted or just spread across so many things that wantingly or unwantingly our attention is demanded of. So dharana would be to make it one pointed, and I think that dharana is a requirement for doing your dharma, which is another interesting connotation of the word dharma.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and that brings to mind the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, essentially the whole message is about karma yoga, and that's about understanding one's dharma or one's unique positioning or relationship to the cosmos, to society, to the one in a sense. And what does that look like? And that's karma yoga. What does it look like for me to live out my dharma in this lifetime? And that's what Krishna is conveying to Arjuna. And then that brings to mind another emanation or another implication of the word dharma in the Buddhist context. In the Pali, they would call it Dhamma, not dharma. And in the earliest teachings of the Buddha, he talks about ekagata. Ekagata means single pointed focus of the mind, which is very similar to this notion of dharana. So in order to attain to the Dhamma or the Dharma, in order to enter the stream, the Buddhists would say it requires this single-pointed mind focus. So I think that's very, very relevant and no coincidence there that those words have that meaning in relation to each other. And then maybe we can move to this notion of, well, before we get to Europe, I would say passing from South Asia to Europe, we have to go through Iran or greater Iranian region of the Middle East. And just to note there that in Avestan, the word Rita that I referred to earlier, which is the thing in which we become aligned to, the manifestation of that word in Avestan is Asha. And this was very central to Mithraic and Zoroastrian religions coming out of the greater Iranian region of the planet. And then from there, we see it going into Latin with firmus, which having to do with firm, just as you alluded to with the root, the Proto-Indo-European root of dar. Um, and that coming into words like affirm, confirm, and then ultimately throne. And so thinking about throne, there's so many theological, mythological implications of that and its relationship to this notion of Dharma. What do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, lots of thoughts. Um, no, beautiful tapestry, Joshua. One of the things, as you were earlier saying, just to circle back, is you were mentioning Bhagavad Gita, and Bhagavad Gita is a phenomenal text. Um, Perhaps because it's one of the staples when you want to know what Dharma is. To me, in the study of Bhagavad Gita, it seems like that is what it is all about. Sketching and scaffolding what this idea of Dharma is, which points to very relevant in our time, because we are in disarray and confusion, lack of meaning, and it's sort of old news now that we're all seeking meaning in this time. And that is where Dharma becomes very important. And one of the things that you said, um, is how Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita educates Arjuna about his Dharma. And one of the central ideas of that is context. Normally we do not have context of our life, or we have a very limited context. And although it's a deep topic, I'll just give it a um, quick overview. And we are born, and then we sort of die, or we're born in a certain family, and that is one kind of context. And in the Bhagavad Gita, what's brought into attention is the cosmic context, is where do you come from, where do you return, and that there is, in fact, a cosmic context. And it makes the game much more exciting. It also introduces the idea of karma and reincarnation. And so our limited egoic identity of family and clan, it shatters that and brings us to a much deeper and wider context, both in time and without time. And so all of this is, in fact, related to Dharma. And I would just conclude that by saying that one of the constant themes that I've seen about Dharma, um, both in Buddhism and the Indian mythology and Greek mythology, is cosmic order emerging from chaos. And what is that brings and sustains this cosmic order, is the deities are the gods. And interestingly, in Greek, I just today found this related word, and I will probably not do justice of doing the correct pronunciation. If you understand, please do that. Correct me. It's Sabea. And Sabea in Greek, ancient Greek, means sacred awe. And this word, interestingly, was translated from Dharma to Eusebia by the great king Ashoka in 3rd century BCE. And so he translated that as an equivalent of Dharma in Greek, because, the size of that empire was pretty large, from uh, contemporary India, Pakistan to Afghanistan and beyond. Moving upwards towards China was this Buddhist empire, whom King Ashoka was the emperor of. So perhaps I'll stop there, but I just wanted to bring this Greek um, word also, and this all got started with the connection of the Bhagavad Gita.
Well, I'm really glad that you did that because that was one that was far in the back of my mind. I've read that material before, and I think it's fascinating to realize that or contemplate the fact that in the ancient world at that time, there was already so much interconnection in terms of share of ideas and cultures. And we tend to think, I think, in modern times with our technology, that in the ancient world, people were very disconnected, but rather it's not the case. They were actually quite connected. And many people, well, maybe not many, but at least there are a good handful of people that would suggest that a lot of the ideas that we see emerging within the context of the Hellenic world, the ancient Greeks, actually came from ancient Iran or even ancient India. And so there was a lot of, or vice versa, they could have influenced each other. And so it was this co-emergent property, some of these really central philosophical principles or ways of thinking. A word that you mentioned, though, when you were talking about Krishna and Arjuna, was educate. And I think that educate's just a fun word to highlight in this context because uh, in the Latin, it comes from two roots, e or e, and ducere, which basically means leading outward or to to lead in general. And so it basically is alluding to this notion that education is this movement from darkness to light, from ignorance to understanding, and which is very different than instruction or teaching in a didactic sense that we've become so accustomed to in modern times. So that's very important when we're talking about spirituality in general and dharma, because we might say that dharma is something which is imbued within the individual. It's endogenous. It's inherent within the heart. And so, in order to for a person to understand what their dharma is, right, they have to be brought out, educated out of the illusion which clouds them from understanding what is already within them, right? And so in many cases, maybe mirror is a good word for us to talk about at some point in the future, but in many Sufi lineages and many different forms of spirituality, they talk about, the teacher being a mirror for the seeker. And so I think that's a very important thing. And that's Krishna and Arjuna's relationship. Ultimately, Krishna as the embodiment of the Godhead is the perfect mirror to reflect back to Arjuna who he is and what his dharma is. And that's essentially the core of the Bhagavad Gita. Another thing that you mentioned, it brought to mind this term from the Avestan, which is Amesha Spenta. And you mentioned the gods. That's right. You mentioned that the gods are what hold the cosmic order in place. Well, in the Zoroastrian, the ancient Iranian context, there there was this understanding of these seven entities called the Amesha Spenta, which were emanations of the spirit of wisdom, basically Ahura Mazda. And so, and also this number seven is very interesting if we see it tracked across different mythologies in the Middle East, because, well, even in India, there were seven rishis of the Vedic period that cognized the Vedas. There are this continuous theme of sevens, these seven seers, seven teachers that go out into the world and they bring this knowledge. And then also we see that in the Zoroastrian context. I think there might even be a form of this in the Greek world as well. But just to say that there's, again, this continuity of these almost like Platonic forms that exist beyond the physis, the physical flux of reality that are holding things in order.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you, Joshua. Beautiful. Um, yeah, such a we could keep on going on this, but another quick definition of Dharma that comes to mind is I actually heard it from Pirzia Inayat, who is the teacher or the lineage holder of the Inayatiya Sufi order. And I don't know if it's his definition, but he said, Dharma is that which you cannot not do.
Hmm.
And, it connects with what you were saying was that it's the inner calling of our heart, of each being. And I think what is so challenging is, and why we need the sacred works such as the Bhagavad Gita and spiritual teachers is to come in contact with our own heart and that divine order and the divine harmony without which our life can just be chaos or confusion, which is what we find ourselves in the world today. So we need to come back in that inner alignment. So maybe switching gears a little bit, such a deep terrain and many pathways of even the Iranian pathway that you have stirred here. But maybe changing gears towards the second word that very surprisingly, when you had mentioned the word Dharma along with the word throne, I did not know um, that throne would be intimately connected with Dharma. So maybe we can begin there and maybe do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, if we just think visually with our imaginal faculties about this thing, the throne, what is the throne and what does it signify? And the throne is that upon which sits the one, right? The ruler of a people, the let's say in a way the God. The God sits upon the throne. And so if we think about how does throne relate to Dharma, right? It's like, well, Dharma is the throne. It's the foundation upon which our highest principle sits, right? It is the highest principle in a way, but if we look into like ancient Greek philosophy, right, there's this Trinitarian understanding of the universe, and we see that also in Vedic uh, culture, philosophy, mythology, with the Trimurti, with Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Well, in the Platonic understanding, the number one would be the Deus absconditus, which is the God which is hidden, which is hidden in luminous darkness. And then out of that darkness comes the word, comes the logos, comes the Dharma. It's that which starts bringing all of the chaos of the cosmos into creation, into form. And and so in that sense, we could say that that which sits upon the throne is, we can't really define it. There's no language for it, but we know the throne is there. So if the throne is there, then there must be something which utilizes the throne. So I think that in that sense, we see a lot of religious imagery that connects the two words, um, especially in the Islamic and Sufi context. The philosopher and thinker Henry Corbin wrote extensively about this.
Yeah, lovely. And actually, I remember when you had brought this word, even though I did not know the connection that you're highlighting here again, as in Dharma, about the cosmic order and the deities. Um, I didn't know that it was connected with the word throne. But what I did like is one of my sort of favorite words in Arabic related to the word throne is Arsh. And Arsh points to the divine throne. And I think this idea of Dharma as being the seat of cosmic order from which all law unfolds um, is a beautiful synonym for Arsh.
Hmm.
And then Arsh by itself has connections with sky and throne. And interestingly, maybe I know that you had highlighted some connections for Arsh. But one of the words that I found very interesting was its connection, or the word connection points to foundation. And it again is connecting back to Dharma and the foundation for everything, the basis and the firmness, which holds everything together. So I maybe it's not a coincidence that we came up with these three words that seem to have this deep mystical connection. But you had found some interesting words in the Greek direction and also connecting with Henry Corbin around throne.
Hmm. Yeah, well, the word Arsh, well, Arabic is a root language. So like many languages, but particularly Arabic, it's preserved this feature very saliently. So the word Arsh is three letters in the Arabic, which from there we can extrapolate depending upon how we place the vowels or double some of the sounds. It turns into a verb or can turn into a noun. And so Arsh in this sense, it literally means throne. But when we turn it into a verb with orush or arrasha, it can mean different things. So orush means a bower, and a bower essentially is like a shaded covering associated with vines. And then arasha means to roof. So we have this notion of stability and protection, right? So stability in the throne, but then protection as a covering above. There are some of the other words that are associated with the word arsh um, in Arabic are mudilla, khayma, and rakan, which mean umbrella, tent, and pillar. So again, all of these things are associated with some sort of stability or protection. Um, and then to speak a little bit about the Sufi context in which the word Arsh is implicated, many of the Sufi tariqas say that the Arsh is the highest heaven, the highest level of reality. And Henry Corbin, who is an expert in especially Iranian forms of Sufism, likened this to the Greek Empyrean sphere of reality, which Empyrean comes from the Greek word pyr, which is fire. And then we can tie that to the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus of Ephesus, who was sort of the first one to implicate the word logos as this cosmic ordering principle of the universe, and he likened it to fire. So I think that we have a few symbols or a collection of images there. We have the throne, stability beneath us. Then we have the covering, the roof, protection above us, and then maybe in the center of that, if we're talking about like a house, then we have this flame. So it is stable, it is protective, and it's alive. And so we could attribute all of those things to the Dharma.
Yes, absolutely. And as you were speaking, some of the things that in my sort of detective work surprisingly came to me. Uh, One was this connection that you're highlighting of Dharma and Logos, which I will have to think about it, but it sounds very resonant. And something I came across because I wanted to know if, although Arsh is Arabic, I was wondering if this, because sometimes words can mysteriously or mystically have a connection just with the sheer sound. And one of the words that in a previous episode I referred to was wow, which is present as wah in Persian and also in the Sikh tradition. Um, but not to digress there, but I did find a word arsha
Hmm.
with a different S sound, which is more at the top of the palate in Sanskrit. And arsha, it refers to that which derives from the rishis.
Mm.
So the rishis are known as you were earlier mentioning the Vedas for the dispensation of the entire Vedas, which is a powerful transmission in the Indian continent and perhaps one of the most ancient transmissions on the planet. Um, so yeah, that does seem to connect with the logos. Do you have any specific insights you had on this connection of logos and dharma? And then just to bookmark, I do have something I wanted to say about Empyrean, but I'm curious to know if you, in fact, how did you stumble across this connectivity between dharma and logos?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's a question that has been a question for me for a long time. What is the logos, which we talked at great lengths about in the previous episode. And I think that's also been a question for many seekers, many philosophers. You see people like Fritjof Schuon, people of the perennial philosophy movement or the traditionalist movement. Many of them speak about this, and essentially many of them see there being this analogous quality between these different terms, logos, dharma, Tao, even, et cetera, et cetera. And what we can see, because most of these words generate from an Indo-European context at some point in that group's history. So, and we also see that civilization, as we know it, of course, there are probably some outliers that we will miss in this discussion, but for the sake of the conversation, we'll see that civilization as we know it now, is consummately an Indo-European project. So we see that over the course of time, and we can even just take the Greek context for an example. And there's I think it's a 2 or 3 volume book by a man named Werner Jaeger called Paideia. Paideia means education in a sense, or the rearing of children, the upbringing of children. And Paideia was it was this ancient Greek notion of how to educate a child into society. Well, that book, he kind of traces the major historical and philosophical evolutions within Greek thought. And you can see how over time, through their literature, the Greeks were slowly developing this notion of a singular cosmic order, this one principle that they could refer to, and which influences or informs human life. And similarly, we see that in all of these different contexts. And so there's a question of, well, did it all come from a singular source, or did it sort of spring up um, in these different silos of Indo-European culture simultaneously? Was there communication between these different societies over the course of history? And ultimately, it just comes down to the fact that whether it be the rishis in South Asia or it be the magi in the Iranian region of the planet or these ancient Greek mystic philosophers, they're all coming to this common understanding of there being an ordering harmonic principle of the cosmos, which is metaphysical, but which informs the physical realm, and that through contemplation and looking inward through the mind's eye, this, as we spoke about in the beginning, this dharana, this single pointed mind focus, we can individually come into alignment with that cosmic order, which in effect is our Dharma.
Yeah. Um, so beautiful. Thank you, Joshua. Okay, so one of the words that came to me in regards to Empyrean was Chidananda, which is a word in Sanskrit which points to consciousness. And maybe it's just a connection of fire, but in one of the way Chidananda is produced is through the union of Soma and Surya, which is the meeting of the moon and the sun, which in the mystical practices of Tantra refer to the uniting of the object and the subject, and the
Hmm.
object pointing to the moon and the subject pointing to the sun or the fire. And when the two unite, you have the pure fire, which is Chidananda. So, anyways, yeah, that was something that got triggered in my mind, and also this connotation of Arsh with something that's very high that the gaze cannot meet. Um, which I don't know how that connects with foundation, but it's interesting to have this sort of paradoxical connection, at least in my mind.
Hmm. Yeah, you're mentioning Chit Ananda, but generally the formula is Sat Chit Ananda, right?
Hmm.
So where does Sat come into that relationship?
Well, yeah, Satchitananda is more like a aphorism, I would say. Chidananda as the Sanskrit word. I don't know the exact etymology, but it does point to consciousness, and in the sort of the tantric, maybe what's the word? This mixing of the energies of the masculine and feminine, the balancing of that polarities points to Chidananda. And uh, without going too much into the mysticism of that, Surya and Soma, the sun and the moon, which also oftentimes in mysticism point to the male, masculine, and feminine principle. When they unite, the you have Chidananda. When the balancing of these two polarities happens, you give birth to consciousness. Somehow, to me, I feel like that the Arsh might be a confluence where the polarities are balanced.
Hmm.
But I'm going beyond my pay grade.
But you're evoking a lot from within me, so I'll just respond to that by saying, well, we could argue that, I mean, the word consciousness conveys an understanding of our experience of reality, which is dialogical in nature. That regardless of if there's another person in front of me or not, I'm in conversation with existence because I see myself as subject and everything outside of me as object. Even if my eyes are closed, generally we're having conversations with ourselves in our mind. There's always, or an image. And just to bring us from South Asia to Greece for a moment. This is sort of the distinguishing feature of the spirituality of Plato. Socrates, through the pen of Plato, essentially tells us that the highest form of art, or especially for the philosopher, right, and somebody who practices this art form is, in essence, a philosopher, is the art form of dialectic. And dialectic is basically it's this ding 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 ding, it's pitting two opposing points against each other and finding some sort of agreement or resolution between them. But then generally that opens up into, or if there's no, we could think about it in many different ways, but through dialectic, it brings us to the one in Greek philosophy. And so we could say that the way of Socrates, the way of Plato, which could be footnotes to much more ancient and unwritten traditions of that region of the planet, not and arguably not just that region, because we see in instances of people like Rumi and Shams, how this dialogic relationship, this I-thou relationship, how catalytic it is for awakening. But we could say that the path of those Greek philosophers, as they described it to us in their writings, is one of relationship, and that the fastest way to attain this unity of the throne, maybe we could say the station of the throne, is through an interpersonal relationship. When I'm looking into your eyes, Plato even says in one of his dialogues that he alludes to the eye as being like a mirror, and that I can see myself in your eyes as a miniature in the reflection in your pupils, and that there's something mystical that happens there. And we did earlier speak a little bit about this idea of the mirror, right? So I completely agree with you. And whether it's in the context of this mystical understanding of Surya and Soma, or Rumi and Shams, or Socrates and Plato, or Joshua and Kenan, there is and just to go back to the word logos, dialogue comes from the Greek, dia logos, two logos, right? And so something mystical can happen in that interrelating process, which, and even in the Buddhist context, one of the symbols in especially in the forest tradition of Thai Theravada Buddhism is that I think it's called the Anuloma symbol, and it's a bit of a swirl, spiral, and then comes up and ding 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 zigzags until it comes to a point, and then there's a point above that, so liberation. So. So all that to say, I completely agree with you, and it excites me because I think it goes to the core of the spiritual or philosophical life.
Yeah, lovely. Actually, that I think we still have a little bit of time, so I wanted to bring something that I think you so elegantly described, and I was wondering if this would be the correct, time to say this, but and I feel like it is. And there's this idea of since we've been talking about empyrean and throne as something very high, one of the questions I have is, can one witness the throne?
Hmm.
Can you be seated on the throne? Which I would say, to me, with some of the mystical ideas, yes, you can be seated on the throne, but you cannot witness the throne, because as a perceiver, it is going to be always too high, it is beyond, you know. One way to say that would be, your eyes dare not glare at the highest throne. And so I wanted to relate an idea in Tantric Shaivism and Kashmir Shaivism. There's Shiva and Shakti, which are the polarity. Uh, Shiva being the witness, the Godhead, and Shakti being the creative force, often referred to as Maya. But when one awakens, particularly in Tantra, the illusion is seen as your creative power, your own creative power of Shiva. But beyond Shiva and Shakti is what they call Parma Shiva. And in Parma Shiva, there is no duality. So there is no one to observe. You can be Parma Shiva, but you cannot have this duality uh, in Parma Shiva. And I don't think it's actually describable. So the more I say, the more confused we will become. The buck stops of all etymology. The buck stops there.
Yeah, that's the wisdom, right? As Socrates would say, I know that I know nothing. And so that's the beginning of the path of wisdom. Well, and to go back to something you also mentioned in the beginning, you mentioned this notion of awe. And I think that is what you're talking about in this stage of the or the station of the throne. In Platonic thought, we might say that one can never witness the one, the good itself, but we can come to witness the brilliant light of being. And so, and in the biblical context, also, there are some interesting passages about this notion of not being able to look upon God himself, or even in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says, Krishna, let me see you in your true form. And Krishna is basically like, whoa, you don't know what you're asking for. You can't handle it. And so he unveils himself for a moment, and Arjuna is screaming, please, God, no, take it away, take it away. And so he assumes again his human form. Um, and then this notion you're talking about of non-duality of consciousness, of the collapsing of subject and object in the Sufi context, we would say this is fana fi Allah, annihilation in God. And I think that that's whether we talk about it as one who has come to witness the light of being, or one who has seen the back of the Lord, or the passing of the Lord, or who has entered the throne room, it all alludes to the same symptom or effect of that state, which is awe, which is annihilation. It's oh, I'm just life has now become we don't seeing God in all things ultimately, and that's the power of the guru or of the sheikh, is that the sheikh can witness the God in you, and in you entering into a relationship with somebody who can actually see that in you through this mirroring process. That's Shaktipat. That's that's what ignites the process, and that's why all these traditions are so adamant about one coming into relationship with a realized awakened teacher, because they can pass that on, and one doesn't have to necessarily work individually their whole life to come to that realization on their own. And again, this comes back to this whole notion of dialogue, dialogos. It's that we are part of a collective experience, a collective human consciousness, and so we are not individual in a way. We're co-arising, as they would say in Buddhism. So in a sense, it's very reassuring at the end of the day, because it's okay. At the end of the day, there's something good, beautiful beyond your imagination, and we're in this together, and we're all conspiring towards it, right? What a beautiful vision of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This co-arising and prismatic, multi-prismatic, so many perspectives. Um, yeah, another word that comes to mind is the Indra's net, talking about mirrors, but we'll keep it for another episode. I think we're closing here on the time. This has been a lovely, poetic, and playful tapestry of playing with these words, which all started with throne and Dharma. Uh, do you want to summarize or say something in terms of whatever comes to you?
I guess it really just comes down in terms of a takeaway, right? A pragmatic takeaway for anybody that listens to this. It comes down to the realization, if you agree with the meanings of these words and find resonance with it, that ultimately there is an ordering current, an ordering principle in the cosmos, and that we can come into alignment with it. To digress very briefly from that, there was a Christian theologian of the 6th or 7th century by the name of Maximus the Confessor. He might have been around there. I'm probably messing it up. But anyways, he's one of the few people in the Orthodox Church that has the title theologian. And I like to think of him as a quantum physicist. And he would say that the ultimate goal of the Christian spiritual life is to align one's tropos with the logos. Tropos being our habituated self, our personal minds, with this cosmic truth, this universal truth. So, what's possible as we get closer to that, and how does life change, is mysterious, and it's powerful, and I think it's the adventure of a lifetime. So that's where I would end off.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And I will just say a few things on something that you just brought. What is the takeaway? And um, I did not know at the start of this detective work that we went into as to how the normally used words like affirm and confirm and foundation, what is their foundation and how does that connect or ultimately with cosmic law in the form of these encapsulating words such as Dharma and throne or Arsh in Arabic. So I hope that the audience finds this enlightening and inspires them to do their own detective and homework on these words of common parlance. That is our goal here, that we become educated users of language, which is a spell through which we morph our perception. So, with that being said, we look forward to the comments of our viewers. If you're watching this on YouTube, please let us know what kind of words would excite you and what kind of feedback you have on the episodes of Play of Words. How could we better navigate um, something that you would enjoy more or find more illuminating as we're figuring this out? And yeah, and if you're listening to this on Spotify or some other audio based technology, then please leave us a feedback there. And pretty soon we'll have a web page where you can propose words and let us know. Let us know. We're eager to know how you're enjoying this. And with that, we bring this Play of Words episodes to an end, and we will see you soon, inshallah.